Hey guys, so I'm recording this about 24 hours after what you're about to watch. So first, my eyes are red. I promise you I haven't been engaging in any recreational stuff. I just woke up not long ago and put my contacts in, and that's why my eyes are red. Okay, so to go kind of put some things on the front end as opposed to editing it in the video. At one point in the video, I misspeak, not because I'm unaware, but I'm just kind of just going off, and I literally misspeak. I'm referring to Rodney King, and at one point I say that he was murdered. Well, I don't put it in those words. I reference him. I say that he was beat nearly to death at one point, and then I slip and say he was beat to death. And of course, that's not what happened. He was severely beat. And at one point in the video, I get that part correct. And then later on, I'm speaking and I just kind of slip and say beaten to death instead of beaten nearly to death. And it's, if you're not paying attention, you probably won't even catch me saying that. But of course, he wasn't killed at that time. I think he died in 2012. But anyway, I'm going off tangent. The other thing is, I mentioned how O.J. Simpson served time in jail. Yes, he did serve 9 years in jail for armed robbery and unlawful imprisonment or kidnapping or something like that. Also, going back to the Rodney King incident, I refer to it as occurring in 1992. That's not true. I don't know if I said the trial or the incident, but just to specify that the actual incident took place in 1991. And the trial in which the 4 police officers were acquitted occurred in 1992 after 7 days of deliberation. Not to get too much detail on that because that's not what I'm talking about. But as I explained in my video, there is a connection, or I'll say a connection or link to the O.J. Simpson trial in my statement, at least anyway. So anyway, enjoy the video and thank you. All right, I'm recording. So about 3 days ago, O.J. Simpson died. I say about 3 days ago, like I don't have a calendar. I'm recording this on the 13th. He died on April the 10th. And to my understanding, it was cancer. So some quick thoughts on O.J. Simpson. He's best known today not for being a great running back unless you're over the age of like 60, or hell, maybe even over the age of 70. He's best known today for the murder of his ex-wife and a man named Ron Goldman, who was possibly his ex-wife's boyfriend. I don't think so. So his ex-wife, a woman named Nicole Brown Simpson, I don't know if they were separated, if they were still married, and a man named Ron Goldman were found brutally murdered in 1994. And then in 1995, O.J., after a long trial, was acquitted for the crime. Now, just to get it out of the way, I think O.J. Simpson did that. I think most people think O.J. Simpson did it. I've always thought O.J. Simpson did it. I was in my early teens when this occurred. I was actually 14 when the murders occurred. And even then, I thought he was guilty. I don't think people today can really appreciate how huge this trial was. It was big, guys. I don't even know what the equivalent of that would be. It would be like, no exaggeration, I heard someone use the comparison saying it would be like if Taylor Swift murdered some people or was charged with murdering people. Yeah, it may have been that big. It was huge. Not necessarily because O.J. Simpson was just that famous, which he was. At the time, O.J. Simpson was still known as he was a famous athlete, like I think he's running back. I don't know anything about football, but I think he's running back, one of the best running backs ever. But also, he had the start of an acting career. But the reason it was so big was because of the racial politics at the time. The fact that he was a celebrity and the fact that there were the racial politics at the time. So what were the racial politics? Well, you cannot look at the O.J. Simpson trial without looking at what had happened 2 years earlier. So April of 1992, I think that's when it occurred, and not the trial. A man named Rodney King, also in L.A., was beat within an inch of his life by 4 police officers. There's a recording of this. You can see it, so it's no doubt that it happened. And these 4 men basically beating and lynching this man. And I say the term lynching intentionally. And they got away with it. And the reaction was, well, for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. There were riots. So anyone who tries to say, well, the George Floyd murder led to riots, 95% of the demonstrations, at least 95%, probably greater than that, of the demonstrations as a reaction to George Floyd were peaceful. This was a riot. People were hurt. Innocent bystanders were hurt. There was an individual named, I think his name was Reginald Denny. He was a trucker, was beat during these riots. Now, I know there are people who were hurt during the George Floyd uprisings. Some of them led to riots, absolutely. But I would say that what happened then was even greater. Not to measure destruction or anything. So I think that people, after seeing this man being beat to death, not a knee on his neck, but being beat to death on record, and seeing the four people get away with it, people wanted justice. And I think that that was one factor that led to O.J. Simpson's acquittal. Also think that was a lot of people were celebrating and watching it because it was 2 years later in L.A., despite it not being in the South, because we know all the racists are in the South, as people like to believe. And by the way, guys, I'm born and raised in the South. LA is pretty racist, and the LAPD is a gang and is literally infested with gang activity. So it was on top of that, the events that happened 2 years earlier, and also the LAPD being completely corrupt. The detective at the time, the head detective, I believe he was a guy named Mark Furman. And he basically won the case for O.J. Simpson. Now, some people who really follow the details of this will dispute that claim. And it's probably more complicated than that. But I'll just tell you, Mark Furman, when people say, is so-and-so racist? Yeah, Mark Furman had Nazi propaganda. He was, he tampered with evidence. He was problematic, to say the least. So, of course, later on, he would end up working for Fox News, because basically Fox News hired Mark Furman to signal to their listeners and viewers that, hey, we get it. He's one of us, guys. So they won the case for O.J. Simpson. Now, what you saw in the case of O.J. Simpson was the justice system working the way it's supposed to, in the sense of, in our justice system, you're supposed to be proven beyond a shadow of or reasonable doubt, not a shadow of a doubt, but not within reasonable doubt. And the LAPD basically created that reasonable doubt for O.J. Simpson. That and the fact that O.J. had a literal dream team of lawyers working for him. So it was theirs to lose. Wish they did. The prosecution. And members of the prosecution, including Marsha Clark and Christopher Darden, they have since then been redeemed. And I think that's good. I mean, the details of the prosecutors, I think they were good people. And they caught some flack at the time. But I think overall they were good people. But I think to look at that, you have to look at the context of the racialized politics at the time, which people don't. It's kind of hard to do nowadays, but they were there, and they were very, very apparent. And even in my teenage mind, they were there. And you could even go back before then with what was going on in the early 90s with the concept of super predators and just the racialized elements of violence, something that the Republican Party is definitely trying to do, or has been doing for decades, but trying to bring it back. But not only bring it back with the rhetoric of black on black crime, but also with immigrants and migrants. The other thing that I think people should talk about, which I don't think they will very much, is CTE. Now, let's be clear here. I don't think O.J. Simpson murdered his wife because of brain damage. O.J. Simpson was a violent person, and he was abusive to his first wife, which people don't talk about very often. He was a violent person. And even after he was acquitted for this murder, he went in and I think he served, I should have checked this, but I think 9 years or close to 9 years in prison for wrongfully imprisoning someone and stealing memorabilia, which he thought was his later on. So even after he got away, literally, I shouldn't say he got away with murder, but, possibly got away with murder, he committed this crime. So does CTE cause him to do these things? No, I think he's a violent person, but CT damaging the part of the brain which does control impulse control. You do that to someone who already has a tendency towards violence, and you have I love cliches. A disaster, or a disaster for recipe, like that. A recipe for disaster. So maybe they'll crack his brain open and see how riddled with holes it is. Probably not. Even if the whole issue of CTE does come up, and he was playing in the NFL at the time when, boy, I mean, they have concussions now, but it was terrible then. They're not going to really have that discussion because Americans love their sports that involve concussions. Boxing, MMA, football. So to bring that into question, no one's going to do that. There's too much money and enjoyment to be had from people damaging their brains. But O.J. Simpson, a terrible person. And like I said, unless you were a cognitive human being at the time and a cognitive human being to witness the events that were occurring few years previous to the O.J. Simpson trial, I don't think you can really appreciate the weight and gravity of this thing. I guess it'd be like trying to explain what was going on with the George Floyd trial and the pandemic and the conflation of all those things 30 years from now. It's one of those things where you really had to be there.